How to teach your dog to speak and shush or be quiet on cue. Before you begin, you need to think about what prompts your dog to bark. Somebody ringing the doorbell, somebody knocking on the door. In this video, we're going to demonstrate with a knock at the door to prompt the barking behaviour.
Yes. 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 Well done.
Please use the train, test, train method. Repeat each step 5 times. If you get 5 out of 5, you're going to push to the next step. You make it a little bit more difficult. If you get 3 or 4 out of 5, then stick. Repeat the step that you're on. If you get only 1 or 2 out of 5, then you need to make it easier. We're not going to show you all the repetitions so as to save time in this video. The order of events is important. First you knock on the door, then the dog barks. You mark with a yes and you feed a tasty treat. You repeat this 5 times. Let's watch this first step again. If knocking at the door doesn't prompt your dog to bark, then you can try ringing the doorbell. You could also try enticing your dog, tempting him with a favourite toy or a handful of tasty treats just held out of reach. Will that make your dog bark? As soon as your dog is consistently barking in response to your chosen prompt, you can introduce your new cue. I use the cue speak. Please remember that the order of events is important. You're going to say your new cue just before you knock on the door.
Speak. Yes. Speak. Yes. Speak. Yes. Speak. Yes. Speak. Yes.
It's now time to fade the prompt. Ask your dog to speak. If your dog barks, mark the correct response and feed a tasty treat. If your dog doesn't bark, you can follow up again with the knocking at the door. Say yes and feed a tasty treat. Next repetition, try without the knock. If you need to, you can soon knock. Just leave a slight gap so that the dog can preempt between your speak cue and that knocking at the door.
Speak. Yes. Speak. Yes. Speak. Yes. Speak. Yes.
Remember to use the train, test, train method. That's 5 repetitions of each criteria before moving on to the next step. If your dog's reliably speaking on cue, it's time to introduce your new quiet cue, because really what we're wanting is to be able to ask the dog to be quiet. We're going to prompt the dog to speak again by knocking on the door. The dog speaks, i.e. they bark. We're then going to give our new cue and we're going to mark and reinforce the quiet. Your new cue can be any cue that you choose. You might choose to say quiet, you might choose to say shush, you might choose to say thank you. The cue you choose, to be honest, is irrelevant, but consistent use of your cue is very relevant. So whatever cue you choose is the one that you're going to use in future when you want to ask your dog to be quiet.
Shush. Yes. Shush. Yes. Shush. Yes. Shush. Yes. Shush. Yes. Oh, very nice.
You could also have a visual cue, a hand signal that prompts your dog to bark or speak. Let's have a look at the cue that I use to prompt my dog to speak.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Is your dog reliably speaking on cue? Have you introduced your quiet cue and your dog is reliably being quiet? Let's prove the cues by playing a game of speak and shush.
Speak. Shush. Yes. Speak. Shush. Yes. Speak. Shush. Yes. Speak. Yes. Shush. Yes. Nice. Well done, you. Awesome.
Let's now test the shush cue. We're going to prompt our dog to speak several times in a row and then ask them to be quiet. As with the speak cue, you could also have a visual cue for quiet. Let's take a look.
Speak. You speak. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Another great way of teaching a quiet cue is to capture the behaviour. Whenever you see your dog quietly resting throughout the day, give your cue and calmly deliver a treat. You do want to do this in a very calm manner, and I advise not clicking the behaviour because you don't want to prompt the dog to get up. You want to promote that relaxation and quietness. Let's take a look at what capturing quiet behaviour might look like. In the next clip, you'll hear me use a quiet cue rather than the previous shush cue. This is just to demonstrate to you that you can choose any word for the behaviour. However, once you've chosen your cue, please be consistent and use the same cue.
Quiet. Quiet. Quiet.
If your chosen cue was shush, you're going to capture the behaviour in exactly the same way as if your chosen cue was quiet.
Shush. Shush. Shush.
What if your chosen cue was thank you? Well, you're going to capture quiet relaxation in exactly the same way.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I quite like the thank you cue because what this means is that if my dog's barking, I can listen to him bark. I can then acknowledge his communication by saying thank you. Thank you for letting me know that something's happening. So I just think that thank you is quite a nice cue. But you can choose any cue you want. The main thing is you say it in a nice way. You say it in a way that promotes a good reaction from your dog, that promotes a happy emotional response.
Thank you.
Please condition a positive association with your quiet cue, a happy emotional response. Train the cue well, practice it in your daily life throughout the day for several days before you're tempted to use it in real life when your dog is actively barking at something in the environment. At this time, you're going to let him have his little conversation. You're then going to acknowledge him by using your quiet or your thank you or your shush cue, and you must be ready with reinforcement. So it's quiet, yes, and treat, 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 treat. I then advise that you move the dog away from whatever was causing the barking and give him something else to keep him busy, something amazing.